Hello friends, welcome back to Dungeon Design in Zelda. Last time we completed the Palace of Twilight, bringing an end to Xanth's false reign. There's only one dungeon left here in Twilight Princess, which is a bit bittersweet. And just like with Palace of Twilight, there's very little mandatory stuff to actually do before we head into the dungeon. That said, there are a few things that I'd like to get out of the way before we head inside. I mentioned it last time, but really this is your last chance to complete the game's robust amount of side quests before heading into the dungeon. I forgot to mention the Cave of Shadows before, mostly because I often forget it exists, which is an optional mini dungeon in the same vein as the Cave of Ordeals, though this one is exclusive to the HD version of the game on Wii U. You have to complete the entire dungeon in wolf form, and it's basically just room after room of combat challenges, but they place enemies and obstacles in such a way so as to keep things interesting and challenging, even more so than Cave of Ordeals did, which I kinda dig. There isn't much reward for this within the game itself, aside from a wallet upgrade, but the amount of hearts that you complete the dungeon with gets saved onto the Wolf Link amiibo, and then is carried over to Breath of the Wild if you use the same amiibo to summon Wolf Link into the game as a companion. It's a neat optional tie-in, but ultimately not worth completing every time you go through this game, since to me that wallet upgrade feels like it comes too little too late into the game, and the amiibo holds that data independently of your save file, so even if you start the game over, those hearts are still retained on the amiibo for use in Breath of the Wild. As was the case last time, there's pretty much no mandatory pre-dungeon stuff to do. We simply have to warp to Castletown and walk on over to the castle gates. We'll be treated to a cutscene in which Midna uses the fused shadow to transform into this gigantic beast and destroy the barrier that Ganondorf has placed around the castle, and then we can push the gates open and head on inside the final dungeon. Welcome to Hyrule Castle. We actually have been here before, near the start of the game during our first moments as Wolf Link, and then again after Lakebed Temple while carrying a dying Midna over to Zelda. However, those visits restricted us to the underground castle waterways and the rooftops. This time we'll be able to explore the castle properly. As far as its overall structure goes, the dungeon follows a classic 3-act structure. That is to say that it's divided into 3 distinct sections with different objectives, different progression structures, and different tones. The first section is the castle courtyards on the ground level. This area is huge and wraps around the exterior of the entire rest of the dungeon. It's not all that interconnected per se, but it branches off from the front entryway area and has a few little loops and shortcuts here and there. What's great about it is its strong combat focus and its openness. There are 2 keys to find in the courtyards, as well as the dungeon map and a mid-boss fight, and you can pretty much complete the rooms of the courtyard and find these in whichever order you'd like, lending this one a bit of flexibility in terms of its progression, which I'm always a fan of. The second section is the bulk of the castle interior. There's a large grand hall, tons of interconnected hallways that loop around and all converge with each other, and swaths of devious puzzles and combat challenges. The vibe here is dangerous and empty and really just fitting. Like the courtyards, there's a bunch of collectible goodies in this section, such as another small key, the boss key, and compass. And like the earlier section, these can pretty well be completed in any order, and there's several rooms that you could skip entirely simply due to how many of these sections are all connected to each other. I'm of the mindset that having the layout like this really helps this feel like, well, a proper castle more so than a dungeon, as if they designed the layout of the castle first and then built the progression structure around that, as opposed to the other way around. The third and final act or section of the dungeon is the castle tower, which is pretty much a straight ascent up these broken winding staircases leading up to and including the boss fight at the top in the throne room. It's the most straightforward section of the dungeon, but also the most climactic feeling. There's a real rising tension throughout the entire dungeon, which starts to reach a tipping point in this final section right before the boss. I have to say that after reviewing the other 3D Zelda games before this, that it feels like they were constantly refining the tone and structure of what a Ganon-controlled final dungeon should feel like, and that tone is at its best here. At the same time, some of the puzzles here feel a bit rudimentary and generic, like they could be slapped into any Zelda game without requiring any key items that are unique to Twilight Princess, such as these torch lighting puzzles and hidden gem switch puzzles. Between that, the strong combat focus, and some other details that I'll come back to in a moment, I can't help but wonder if this was one of the first dungeons that they designed for this game, before they had quite figured out the entire scope of Twilight Princess and were looking to see how far they could push their ambitions for scale. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, by the way. In Ocarina of Time, Ganon's Tower was also one of the first things they designed, and it's an iconic and awesome final dungeon. But as far as Hyrule Castle goes here, it does make me somewhat wish that Link's entire inventory were better integrated into the dungeon's various puzzles. There's a few moments where they do work your items in well, like this part in the courtyard where you use the Dominion Rod, and the spinner of all things getting put to use in the tower upstairs, but for each of these unique puzzles is another one where you simply have to light torches or activate switches. Not bad overall, just an interesting thing to note. As far as architecture goes, this one is pretty much what you'd expect. Hyrule Castle has 5 floors, and in terms of its overall footprint, may be one of the largest in scale in the entire game. It's massive, especially these huge open courtyards, and the sense of scale atop the tower is executed perfectly, and as I mentioned before, it really does feel like they designed the castle layout first and foremost. Nothing feels out of place in here, with the exception of a distinct lack of stairs leading up to the second floor. Like, how would the royal family normally get in and out of the castle without the claw shots? But aside from that little nitpick, everything feels integrated and interconnected here perfectly. The royal crest is plastered everywhere as you'd expect it, and it really feels like Ganondorf just moved in here without changing much in his haste to truly conquer Hyrule. As far as noteworthy symbolism or iconography that stood out to me goes, aside from said royal crest, there is the symbol of the light medallion on some of these switches, which seems to have been lifted right from the Temple of Time dungeon. This isn't too out of place since the sages have always had close ties to the royal family anyways, and the rest of the sages' symbols can also be found in the throne room of the castle upstairs. There's also this line art found in the throne room, as well as on the courtyard doors, that I find feels a little out of place here. They feel more in the style of the Twilight architecture than the swirly patterns that we usually see for Hyrule's royalty. And we see in an earlier cutscene that these patterns already existed prior to the Twilight invasion, so it's not like they were added afterwards by Zant or Ganondorf or whatever. They're visually really cool, but just feel out of place to me. The Twilight crest is found in one spot within the dungeon as well, on these floor tiles in one of the courtyards here. This one also feels out of place to me, but I suppose these tiles could be like turf placed over top of the actual ground here sometime after Zant showed up and took control of the castle. That's the best I got, really. Aside from the Palace of Twilight, this is the only location in the game that I can find this symbol, and it struck me as particularly odd and out of place. A few more stray details to note, but there's some strange inconsistencies with the castle layout. First off, they didn't have to add this, but I've always been glad that they did. You can see the rooftop sections that you played on as Wolf-Link earlier in the game from down here in the courtyards, and Zelda's tower is visible here at the north end of the castle, isolated from the structure, just like how we found it earlier in the game, and not unlike how it is later on in Breath of the Wild as well. But as I was looking at these rooftop sections from different angles, comparing the footage for these two sequences, bugs and trying to get a sense of the space here compared to those scenarios from earlier, I just couldn't wrap my brain around it. Something wasn't adding up for me. So I went to the website NoClip, which basically lets you take a free camera around a collection of game environments, and tried to get a bird's eye view of this same location when loading in the two different scenario maps, once for the Wolf-Link escape sequence and then for the Hyrule Castle dungeon. And using a free camera like this, we can see that they don't actually line up properly. Not just a minor inconsistency, it's completely wrong. There is an additional tower here earlier that is missing now, the L shape of the rooftop near Zelda's tower is flipped, and these stone walls are laid out incorrectly. The one with this central platform seems right, but the stone wall that should connect to the missing tower is on the east side instead of the west side of the wall. Oh, and these weird columns connecting the spires to the castle are missing too, despite that you can see the ones on the other side of the castle. That is particularly strange to me, but maybe they would have gotten in the way of the platforming. And that missing tower, ugh. This bugs me probably more than it should. I'm sure most people would never compare these closely or even notice to begin with, but I love consistency, at least within the game itself, and this was sort of a letdown for me. The castle also feels a lot bigger in these Wolf-Link sections, and the height of these stone walls seems to extend up higher than they do here. But oh well, it's such a minor thing to get hung up on overall. But then strangely, while out on one of these balconies, I noticed a familiar silhouette in the distance that caught my eye. It's the gateway for the Bridge of Eldin, but completely in the wrong spot. So again, I went to NoClip to check, bring the camera out, and yeah, it's definitely Eldin Bridge, and not the Castletown gateway that should be there. Albeit this is a lower poly model of the bridge gateway, but it's unmistakably Eldin. So why these discrepancies? What's going on here? Well, this may tie into my thoughts from earlier, that this might be one of the first dungeons that they designed for the game. Early screenshots and trailers of Twilight Princess, back before the game even had a title, showed that Eldin Bridge used to connect directly to either Hyrule Castle or at least to Castletown before ultimately it was moved to the other side of Hyrule Field. If this was placed here during an earlier build of the game as a background element and then they simply forgot to remove it, then that would explain its presence here. We also see in those same trailers that the role of the castle waterways may have been different, with more spirits and Link's wolf senses showing a scent to follow through here, as well as a scene with Link in Hylian form fighting a Skulltula down here. A lot of the early game story stuff for Twilight Princess was also changed pretty late in development, so it's entirely possible in my eyes that maybe in an earlier build of this game that the waterways and rooftop sequences could have played out very differently and actually been more accurate to what we see in the Hyrule Castle dungeon layout. So I think the developers had a plan that got shuffled around, and the castle dungeon layout remained unchanged, but the rooftop and waterway scenes got huge overhauls alongside the overworld map being constantly tweaked and changed. When looking back at these old trailers and comparing these sequences to the final game, that's just what makes the most sense to me. This trailer showing Wolf-Link on the rooftops shows a slightly different layout than what we got in the final game. So ultimately, in my eyes, there's no winning with these inconsistencies. Despite how much it bothers me, I have to force myself to move on. Most of the dungeon, while feeling quite cohesive with its setting, doesn't have much in terms of lore to discuss, but there is one particular detail to note in the outdoor sections. Around the back of the castle on the north end is a small secluded courtyard that Zelda's tower overlooks. There's a small graveyard here and a series of puzzles. Among the graves are various hints to solving said puzzle, including this one which reads, "The cursed swordsman sleeps before the sacred tree." In the context of the puzzle, this refers to a hidden switch that we can find under the tree, but given that this is a graveyard, this spot under the tree, which is surrounded by specters, could be the grave and final resting place for a specific swordsman. Now, I highly doubt that I'm the first one to come to this conclusion, but it's entirely possible that the cursed swordsman refers to the Hero's Shade, the spectral figure who has been training Link throughout the game, unlocking various combat techniques for us. The final place we encounter him is even right outside the castle castle gates. It's not confirmed by any means, but he is the best candidate really. If you weren't already aware, the hero's shade is actually Link. Well, not this Link, but Link, the hero of time, the same Link that we played as in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. The poor guy has led a hard life, and even states that while he accepted life as the hero once, he was never able to pass on his lessons to those who came after, until now in the afterlife when he can teach his descendant, this Link. A bit of Zelda history for you, but in this timeline, Link, the hero of time, prevented the adult portions of Ocarina of Time from ever happening. After the end of the game, as a child, he met with Zelda and warned the royal family of what could happen, leading to Ganondorf's attempted execution, which we saw earlier in this game. It's not unlikely that he kept ties with Zelda and the royal family after these events, with Zelda having even gifted him the Ocarina of Time itself, which he took with him on his journey to Termina. So when it came time for him and he eventually passed away, I see no reason why he wouldn't have been buried here at the castle graveyard, and his grave sitting under a sacred tree would be a more poetic resting place than any I can think of, given that the hero of time was taken in and cared for by another important sacred tree early on in his life. Not groundbreaking theory stuff by any means, but it does add a tragic layer of context to this area, and even though we've already learned all that we can from the hero's shade, this cursed swordsman who lived a tragic life still finds a way to help us out in this puzzle even after passing on. Alright, on another note, let's look at the music. As mentioned earlier, the castle itself is divided into 3 distinct acts, or sections, and the music changes between these sections as well. Sort of, that is. The first section in the outdoor courtyards actually has no music whatsoever. Instead, there is just the sound of the falling rain. Truth be told, while many may not agree with this choice, I stand by it. Music in Zelda is great, but when building a tense atmosphere or anticipation, sometimes the absence of music can hit just as hard, and I think that's the case here. This game has had a wonderful and bombastic score up until now, and that score will continue during the later portion of the dungeon and boss fight. But here, in this moment, there's nothing but eerie silence and the sound of rain, and that is something that has always stood out to me. That silence embodies anticipation. Once we make our way inside the castle, the music fades in with a slow, hollow-sounding variation of the Hyrule Castle theme, which returns from A Link to the Past and Wind Waker. A Link to the Past's version of this theme is really great and dramatic. Wind Waker's take on it was a slower version that felt more melancholic and thoughtful. But here, it's all echoey and eerie. This works really well for me, since the castle is mostly empty, and it sounds like the theme song echoing through these grand halls like a shadow or echo of the busyness that should normally be here under regular circumstances. But now, with the forces of good driven out of the castle, this version of the theme teems with sadness and eeriness, like the castle itself crying out. It's beautifully done. Mixed into the track is actually a building phrase from Ganondorf's theme, which plays out for a bar or two before reverting back to the castle theme. It's not the most recognizable portion of Ganondorf's theme, but still plays into the theme of this place being under his control. Once we make it to the top of the castle and begin our ascent up towards the boss fight, the music changes one final time, now more heavily mixing Ganon's theme into the track with this bassy progression. It's not an entirely unique track, more so just building off what the other one did, but it mixes the theme songs of the castle and Ganon himself masterfully. And a neat little trick is that the farther up you go, the closer to that boss door you get, the more Ganon's theme overshadows the castle theme, until you're at the top floor and it's almost completely drowning the previous music out. That hits hard. Having Ganon's theme used to build a sense of rising tension has been done before. Both Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker did this, but this might be my favorite take on it musically. It's not as iconic as the red carpet ascent from Ocarina of Time, but the way the dungeon music evolves here, from no music at all to a hollowed out echo of an iconic track to being drowned out by Ganon's theme, is just executed so perfectly here. It really feels like our pal Koji Kondo had a goal here to just musically outdo himself for this finale, to take what he'd established and musically improve upon that in every way, and he absolutely knocks it out of the park here. Alright, let's talk about the progression one last time. We'll emerge into the castle courtyard from the south side. The castle front door is locked, and we can head through either door, east or west first. For the sake of this video, we'll start on the west side. This western courtyard is divided into two sections. The first one locks us into an arena where we'll have to battle a horde of bokoblins. Easy enough. The next locks us into a combat challenge with one final showdown against King Bulblin. I guess this is the mid-boss fight. Already. This is now our fourth encounter with him, and this fight plays out similar to our battle with him right before Arbiter's Grounds. At this point, the battle shouldn't be too difficult, especially if you've loaded up on hearts and learned all the hidden skills, so just be persistent with those sword techniques, and before long he will actually yield, ending the battle. He hands over the small key to the castle front door and says that he only follows the strongest side before taking his leave. I have to say that this is one of those often overlooked characters, but I always love these encounters with him. As a minor antagonist, we see him really trying to learn and grow from his encounters with Link. Our first battle against him on horseback was one when we knocked him off the Elden Bridge. Then when we encounter him again on the Bridge of Hylia, he sports two large shields, having learned from his previous failure. Our third battle against him sees him abandoning his mount entirely in the hopes of physically overpowering and trapping us, and now seeing that he can't win, he fully surrenders. It's wild how such a minor character can still have an arc so compelling. I love that. Alright, there's some cash we can nab here, and then head up these stairs for a little shortcut back, and we can head into the previous courtyard. At this point, you're able to head inside the castle, but you'll be short a key, so let's head into the eastern courtyard next. We'll find various barricades and watchtowers here, and some of these giant boars. Defeat the baddies, crash through the barricades, try not to spend too long staring at these stone walls because they make no sense, and we'll find this propeller puzzle at the very back end of the courtyard. The solution to the puzzle is on the stone slab under some leaves, so use the Gale boomerang to follow this pattern, which opens this gate, so that we can open this chest and get the dungeon map. Now before we head back, there's this spot here we can dig under the wall and into the northernmost courtyard. Here's the section that's probably the most puzzle focused in the entire dungeon, though you may want to take a moment to defeat all the enemies here before starting into the puzzle. There's various gravestones around here with cryptic little hints, but here's the gist of it. This one hints about under the sacred tree, like I mentioned earlier in the video, so we can bomb this spot under the tree here, which these specters are all surrounding as a hint. gate, revealing a hidden switch. Push it down to open this gate at the eastern wall, and you can refill your lantern oil here as well, since you'll need it. Grab this cache and light this torch, which will temporarily stop the rain. With the rain paused, you can light these torches outside the gate at the western wall as well, where you'll find a pair of these owl statues. Use the Dominion Rod to move them to these divots in the ground at the broken southern wall so that we can jump across here, open this gate, and find this treasure chest with another small key. Okay. Now we can head back, dig under the wall, and then take this shortcut along the inner wall of the eastern courtyard to get back to where we started. With everything found here outside, we can finally unlock the front door and head inside the castle itself. We'll emerge into the foyer here, or the grand hall I guess. This is pretty much the dungeon's central room, as the various hallways all connect back to this room. We'll have another combat challenge against several waves of enemies, including bokoblins and Lizalfos. We can use the claw shots on the chandeliers to reach the balconies up here. We'll find the compass in a chest on one of the balconies and a door on the next one. Alright, we can head on through and into this northern room. There's a dark nut to battle here, which is always a pleasant challenge in my books. And then a small puzzle in which these torches control these stairs, similar to the ones back in the Forest Temple. However, you can totally cheese this puzzle by using the boomerang on this torch while standing on the back stair. The hallway here splits into two directions, which you can take in either order. In fact, you really only have to do one or the other, but for completion's sake, I like to do both. Both paths have some combat challenges against some tough enemies like Dino Foes and Darknuts. Both have some simple puzzles, and both have doors connecting back into the central room. The western balcony here has a switch that spawns in a treasure chest with some cash, whereas the eastern balcony lowers this chandelier down, creating a shortcut back up here, which will be especially useful if you need to leave to stock up on supplies, because we don't have Uku in this dungeon. You'll also find some doors leading to this balcony outside, which overlooks the courtyards from earlier and connects to these towers on the outside wall of the castle. On one of these, we'll have to fight an aerial foes, which rewards us with another small key. On the other side, we'll be about to fight some baddies when the Freedom Fighter group will intervene, rescuing us, I say with air quotes, and exchanging nods before they bugger off into the castle. Though they don't have claw shots, so I don't see how they'll make it past the foyer. And honestly, we could have taken these baddies on ourselves, but I guess it's a nice gesture. We'll find the boss key here as well. We should now have everything we need from the main castle section, so we can spend one of our small keys and head into the main tower of the castle. From here, it's very straightforward. The first room has us following these ghosts to navigate the falling blocks, but after that, it's just a matter of following the spiral staircase up to the top of the tower. There's some enemies and obstacles in the way, so we'll need to use the spinner and double claw shots to get through here and be on our toes fighting these guys until we reach the top where the boss door is. There's one more dark nut to face off against here, capping this tower ascent off with a great battle. Just a quick side note, if you got all the small keys, you can unlock this side door and find this treasure room. It's loaded with treasure ranging from bombs and arrows to huge amounts of cash and even a fairy to catch. Most of this stuff feels like it comes too little too late at this point in the game, right before the final boss, but it does feel like a nice little reward for exploring the castle thoroughly. Okay, with all of that said and done, we can now head through the boss door. Here we are, the top of Hyrule Castle. We'll find Ganondorf sitting upon the throne. There's some dialogue exchanged, some usual evil guy ramblings about power and whatnot, normal stuff, and then Ganondorf initiates the battle by somehow possessing Zelda's body. Didn't know that was an ability he had in his repertoire. Zelda looks absolutely creepy here. It's pretty awesome. Alright, so the battle kicks off with a classic match of Dead Man's Volley, a series staple. A lot of people roll their eyes at this one, but it's a trope I never get tired of if I'm being honest. Zelda, or well, Ganondorf I guess, will use their sword to launch energy balls at you, which you'll need to reflect back with the Master Sword. Avoid their attacks, including the swoops and magic triangle things, and keep at them with the Dead Man's Volley. The music for this section of the battle is pretty cool. The song is a combination of the verse Ganondorf theme from Ocarina of Time and Zelda's Lullaby itself. It's not incredible, and I usually forget about it completely, but it serves its purpose here just fine. And like the battle itself, if this were it for the finale, it would be a bit of a letdown. But both this track and this battle are one small part of a larger whole, so it's pretty forgivable. With enough attacks directed back at them, it'll leave them stunned and vulnerable, so Midna will actually intervene here, using the power of the fused shadow to purge Ganondorf from Zelda's body. Cool. But this was only the first phase of the battle. Enraged as his body reforms, Ganondorf will actually transform into Dark Beast Ganon. He's more beast-like than previous depictions of Ganon that we've seen, running on all fours, and his design, while pretty cool, definitely leans more into the pig design than I like. I don't know. For me, Ocarina of Time has the quintessential design for Ganon. It's far more unique and intimidating than what we get here, and really felt like it was evolving or building off of the Ganon from the 2D games. But hey, I guess this works too. This is certainly a bit of a twist, fighting Ganon before Ganondorf, so I do like the shakeup. Ganon will avoid us by going in and out of these portals, and then charging at you to attack. When he does, you can use your bow to shoot the glowing gem on his face, which momentarily stuns him. Turns out he still has his wound from his botched execution, which serves as his weak point, so make sure to strike him there while he's down. He'll actually wise up to your tactics pretty quickly and start avoiding your attacks, so Midna will suggest a change in strategy. Beast against beast. Transform into wolf form and line yourself up so that he charges straight at you. You'll get a button prompt, and Midna will actually be able to catch him and throw him onto his side, exposing his weak point. I won't lie, I love that they managed to work Wolf Link into the fight, and being able to use Midna to toss him like this is awesome. You can really feel the weight behind this, it's great. The music for this phase is on the weaker side. It's less dramatic than the previous and next phases, and heavily features these weird Gregorian chants. It feels really weird and out of place for me. Like, I don't really get what they were going for with this track, but it's over pretty quick, I guess. Once we've chomped at his underbelly enough, he'll start transforming into this energy, much like we saw him in that earlier cutscene when Zant first encountered him. Midna will crack out the fused shadow, and Link, realizing what's about to happen, tries to stop her. But before he can, Midna warps both Link and Zelda out of the castle. She then transforms, but we don't get to see the battle play out, only the aftermath. Hyrule Castle explodes apparently, hope those guys made it out, and from the smoke we'll see Ganondorf emerging on horseback, holding Midna's fused shadow helmet. He breaks the relic in his hand before charging at us. Link steels himself for battle, very fitting since this is the hero that brute forces his way through problems, but Zelda quickly prays to the light spirits of Hyrule and receives the light arrows. Alright, it's time for a horseback battle. Zelda herself herself will actually assist during the fight by firing light arrows, so we'll want to pursue Ganondorf and stay within firing range. Watch out for the ghost horsemen that protect him, and when she lands a hit, go in and strike with your sword. This part of the battle is pretty climactic. I love the atmosphere, and I totally get the vibe that we're going for here. But this is another phase of the battle that falls short for me. For one thing, Zelda has some terrible aim. It takes her too long to get ready, and then half the time she misses her shots. If you could manually aim yourself, that would have gone a long way to smoothing out this fight, in my opinion. Otherwise, it feels a lot like the King Bulblin fight from way earlier in the game, but just not anywhere near as fun. And geez, I find these ghost guys weirdly difficult to avoid. I don't know why. Not in a fun, challenging way either, just in an annoying way. But once we've dealt enough damage, Ganondorf will tumble from his horse, and we can get to the final and best part of this battle. It's a one-on-one sword duel, the hero of Twilight against the King of Evil. And this phase of the battle is so awesome that it makes up for every other lackluster part of this climax. The tense music here, the thunder drumming around us, and the brutality of it all is incredible. Ganondorf will wield the Sword of the Six Sages, the very same blade that the sages had tried to execute him with. That's just making a statement. And he will block your attacks pretty consistently. You can get around some of his defenses using your hidden skills, but overall the best tactic is to wait for him to charge at you, as you'll get an opportunity to chance with him. Your blades will clash and you'll have to mash the A button, but doing so successfully will open him up to attack. I love this battle. It doesn't quite hit the same climactic notes as Wind Waker or Ocarina of Time's finales do, but this fight still shows Ganondorf's and Link's incredible raw power, and especially on a first playthrough, this is a great and challenging final battle, all things considered. It's certainly on the easier side compared to those prior games, especially if you know how to get around those defenses, then the fight should only take minutes to do. But even still, there's something really cinematic about this battle that I can't help but love. Maybe it's the way that the camera pulls in nice and low, or the tense one-on-one focus of the fight, but the dramatic nature of this scenario is on the forefront of my mind whenever doing this battle. I just really love it. My biggest nitpick really is that I wish it would just last longer. I want to soak in the moment and enjoy this duel to the fullest, and then, with not but a quick button press, it's over so soon. Link will leap into the air, plummeting the sword into Ganondorf's existing wound, which echoes not just the sages before him, but even a previous hero's finishing move. Clinging to life, Ganondorf tries rising to his feet, but as the Triforce of Power fades from his grasp, he sees a vision of Zant, and then he dies. So, that's the end. The end of Twilight Princess. Ganondorf is defeated. Thanks to the light spirits, Midna is actually alive and returned to her true form, and credits roll. The children return to Ordon, the freedom fighter friends are not dead, phew, and Link and Zelda bid farewell to Midna, who uses her power as the true ruler of the Twilight Realm to destroy the Mirror of Twilight as she leaves. Goodbye, Midna. It's been an incredible journey. So overall, Hyrule Castle is a pretty darn good final dungeon. It hits those climactic grand finale notes in all the right ways, and I love how its layout feels cohesive with its setting, despite the inconsistencies that I pointed out earlier. This really does feel like a castle first and foremost, and a dungeon that takes place in the castle second, and that's great. There's tons of optional goodies and secrets to find, which I love, tons of the most challenging enemies, and it's all capped off with a 4-phase final boss fight, which is just awesome. Not every element is a home run here, but taken as a whole, this is the embodiment of a grand finale for this game. I still hold to that idea that this dungeon was probably developed earlier on than others in the game, as its puzzles and navigation just feel a little less complex than those in earlier dungeons, but that's okay. In a way, breezing through here feels like a showcase of how powerful Link has grown since the beginning of our adventure, and the open nature of the dungeon overall is really pleasant after the huge amounts of linearity that we saw through most of the game, especially those last two dungeons. In fact, in a way, the open nature of the castle here feels like a precursor to the way that we get to take on Hyrule Castle later on in Breath of the Wild, which is just awesome. And man, that final clash against Ganondorf just hits the right notes for me as far as climactic endings go. I love it. Even if Zelda is not at all useful in that final boss fight. Zelda, you're great and all, but sorry, Tetra did it better. So, we're all done with the dungeon design of Twilight Princess. Overall, I have to say that while examining the dungeons of this game, I've come to a realization that I myself have somewhat underappreciated just how great of a game this really is. I've always loved it, but looking at the time I've spent with it for this series, I have to say it really is among the best in my eyes. Its pacing gets a little weird at times, sure, but it's got some of the most consistently high quality dungeons in this series. There isn't a single one that I dislike. Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, and Majora's Mask had fewer dungeons, and some of those were a mixed bag. And while Ocarina of Time matches Twilight Princess with 9 main dungeons, the first 3 in that game are significantly shorter than any of the dungeons here. And then there's the story stuff. I don't think there is a Zelda game with a story that I dislike, but Twilight Princess is one of the best in this regard. And Midna is hands down, without a doubt, the best companion character with the best character arc in the entire series, in my opinion. Of course, that's a topic for another video, which we'll be getting to soon. Now, I said it at the start of this series, and I'll say it again, that the HD version is, to date, the best version of the game. But if you have any means to play this game on any of the platforms that it's available on, then I would urge you to take the plunge and play it if you haven't yet. Is it a perfect game? No. No, it is not. But as far as dungeons go, it is among the best in the series in my eyes. So that's it. We've completed Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, and now Twilight Princess. But as I've been asked frequently, no, this is not the end. Dungeon design in Zelda will return soon. We've got more games and dungeons to examine, so I hope you'll stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before we end this, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to my patrons and channel members, including but not limited to Tetra, Brenda, Justin, Callie, Greymage, Hylian West, Gale, Ethan3G, and Clifford. Thank you all so much for the support and for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye!